Hey guys, welcome back. This is Bluffmunkey back again for Sonic Academy, and today we're going to look at a series of tech tips on how to make synthwave. So we're going to look at some of the techniques used, some of the equipment used, a little bit of history, and then we're going to have a look at a few case scenarios of actually making a little bit of a track. So let's get into that now. Right, so first things first, history lesson. Now, for me, synthwave is quite an interesting genre of music because it's a genre of music that's based heavily on nostalgia. It's one of the few newer electronic genres that's kind of stood the test of time, which is quite ironic considering it's looking back so far into the past 30 years or so, if not more. But it's not just the music. The genre seems to have embraced the whole the look and feel of the 80s as well. So for example, if you do a Google search for synthwave and you do a Google search based on images, a lot of there seems to be a general consensus that synthwave looks a certain way. So you've got things like Lamborghinis and Ferraris, you've got digital cities, you've got neon, you've got deserted landscapes and pink and blue sunsets, that kind of thing. And if there's a channel on YouTube called New Retro Wave, they've been putting out synthwave tracks for quite a long time now. There's various subgenres as well. I think there's dream wave, there's dark wave. A lot of the music's based on 80s horror movies, but something else as well is that it's not just harking back to actual music that existed in the 80s as well. A lot of the music is heavily influenced by film scores of the time, and more interestingly, trailer music. So I'm going to play a few trailers now, just a few snippets of 3 trailers I've chosen. I haven't figured out which ones I'm gonna pick yet, but I'm just going to shut up while these 3 play.
Hey, who is that guy? I don't know, but whoever he was, he's weird and ticked off.
So yeah, just 3 I picked at random there, and the common theme is if you remember what the drums and the synth sounded like in these trailers, we're going to come back to those in some of the videos we're going to do later on. But there's a common theme among them, and if you watch a film like, another one will be Beverly Hills Cop, you know, when he's trying to infiltrate somebody's house and you get that music in the background. So there's people releasing music these days based on incidental music that's happening in film. So it's quite an interesting little observation of where the influences come from. So there's quite a lot of cross-pollination between film, music, art, the way things looked in the 80s, and of course we had MTV starting in the 80s, and it was the whole pop video thing. That's when it all started back then. So it was very heavily stylized, and I think that's what people pick up on these days. But interestingly enough, if you actually look at the artists that make synthwave, they're not heavily stylized themselves. It's just what's presented. Things are presented differently these days, so they'll have their own artwork, and it's all very much of the same kind of look as you've seen from that Google search. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we'll start looking at some of the sounds used, some of the equipment used, and then we'll start to build up an idea of how we make a track from there. So see you in the next one. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video we are going to talk about bass, and the reason I'm singling bass out specifically is because there is one particular kind of ubiquitous preset that has it is the foundation of a lot of synthwave. It's been used so much that we're going to have a look at this one particular bass and how it's put together. Let's go. Right, okay, so the bass we're going to look at is the default preset in the Korg Poly 6. It's the default preset in the plugin as well. And the bass line is, well, the bass patch is called Fat Line Bass, and you will... Let's turn this up. You'll probably recognize it. Now, what makes this bass special is the Poly 6 has got a fairly unusual sounding unison mode. It's got the same kind of controls as most Unison plugins or plugins that have Unison. You've got Unison detune. This is actually set to 0, so there's no detuning going on in this particular patch. But it has an unusual Unison spread algorithm, and it has this analog dial as well, which I think it's something to do with oscillator phase, because if I just play this little sequence I've got going, right, so you probably, if you listen to any synthwave at all, you probably recognize that style of bass. If they're not actually using this particular patch in this particular plugin, they're using something that's heavily influenced by it. But if you listen to it, you can actually hear oscillator phasing, and it sounds like there's almost a fifth 7 semitones oscillator in there as well. There isn't, but it sounds like there is. So something to do with the phasing in this plugin in particular works well for synthwave. Let me just open up the filter. Listen again. That sound you can hear is because once I interfere with the plugin itself, my spacebar stops working for some reason. Probably a bug. So yeah, it's a very simple sound, but I have yet to find a plugin that I can recreate it 100% with, even with settings more or less the same. It's this Unison algorithm that this plugin's using that I find difficult to match. Ignore this one for a second. We're going to come back to this in a minute. So what we'll do is I'm just to show you how this patch is constructed. If you don't have Poly 6, you can get close. I'm just going to initialize Anna 2 and copy this MIDI over. Right, so what we're looking at, if you actually come into the Poly 6 user interface, we've got 6 voices of Unison. So let's give Anna 2 6 voices. Now, one of the things I think makes this Poly 6 patch special is it's quite difficult to put my finger on. It sounds like the oscillators are both in free running mode but also in re-trigger mode at the same time, because you can actually hear the phase beating. So they are kind of locked into each other but also not. I don't know how they've done it. Anyway, so 6 voices. We need to use our detune functions, controls. So the detune spread, I'm not sure if, I don't think that's stereo width in Poly 6. So let's just play around with the detune a little bit in Anna 2. This shape dial here is going to be what gets us there the most. Because obviously this Poly 6 one isn't massively detuned. You don't hear the voices spread out from each other very much. Something like that. So we don't have a Poly 6 filter. So I'm going to go for a 2-pole vintage. That might get us close. And we need to set our envelopes to something fairly plucky. I'm going to take the amp envelope down as well. We don't have separate envelopes in Poly 6, so we're just going to have to make the best of it. So that's got us relatively close. So we're using 6 voices of Unison in using a saw wave. We're having the shape dial right down, so it's not giving it massive Unison spread. It's quite tightly, the oscillators are quite tightly connected with each other still. All we need to do is add, if you look at the Poly 6 over here, let me just switch Anna 2 off. Right, so we've got a sub-oscillator built into the oscillator section in Poly 6. It's a really simple synth. It's just one oscillator with a sub. Let me just switch that in and out. So that's all we've got really. And then a sub. But something to do with the envelopes, the Unison, the filter, the way it all works together on the Poly 6 is special. It sounds good. probably closer. So we just need to add the sub into Anna 2. So close, but no cigar. Like I said, I can't get it exactly the same in any plugin I've tried so far. So if you want the actual fat line bass, get the Poly 6 plugin. But otherwise, you can get so close in other plugins, it probably won't matter. So that is the synthwave bass line. And for any of you that have ever made trance or listened to trance, you'll notice that that bass sound is used all the time in trance as well. And if you go into higher registers, it's quite a common trance pluck sound. So yeah, and I do know when I made trance back in the day, I started making trance in 1996 or something. Well, what was described as trance back then. And I used to make it with a couple of guys who actually had a Poly 6 and a Juno 106. So we were making trance with analog synths. And this kind of sound was what they used all the time before it was multi-tracked. Anyway, history lesson over. So let's get rid of these for a second. I just want to give an honourable mention to the DX7 as well. So we're trying to incorporate a little bit of history into these lessons, into these videos. The 80s was the decade of the preset. Okay, there's no getting around it. There were some very expensive synths released in that decade, and these synths were mostly out of the reach of most people at home. DX7 not so much, and this plugin Dext is a faithful recreation of a DX7 without the hideous user interface of the DX7. I had a DX7 in 1988 and I hated it, absolutely hated it, awful thing. Didn't sound very good for the most part, and the user interface was abysmal. Possibly for me one of the most overrated synths of all time, but at the time it brought something new, so people flocked to it. But because the user interface was so hideous, preset use was rife because nobody knew how to use it. I still don't know how to use a real one. But this one particular bass sound, I would argue, is the most used preset of all time, and you'll recognize it when I play it. But I would say that even if you're not really into the original 80s music, you probably recognize at least 50 tracks that this preset's been used in. And I would imagine that there's in the hundreds of tracks that were released in 10 years that use this preset that you or somebody you know would recognize as well. It was like Aha, Madonna, this track in particular. I'm just gonna, no, wrong track, wrong channel. Yeah, Top Gun, Danger Zone. It was used in, Aha used it, Madonna used it, Michael Jackson used it loads. It was in everything, absolutely everything. So yeah, that's a little video on bass. The fat line bass is the one that's most used. If you go onto something like New Retro Wave, and let me just turn that back on. I'm using it, you know, that's my son yawning, if you can hear it, locked down still. If you go onto New Retro Wave or any of the Synthwave podcasts or playlists and just listen out, go through the tracks and listen out, it's going to be there again and again and again. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
Thanks everyone for watching. We really appreciate all the support from you guys. If you love this video, then smash a like, and if you want to be notified about new videos, hit the subscribe and notification buttons. Peace!